people's issues despite having a tight financial position. Next, Mr. Kwok Wai Keung.
Well, I support this ESG budget as ordinary workers. They look forward to the budget responding to the suffering suffered during the pandemic and offering support accordingly. There's also a series of measures, and due to our economic circumstances and as well as innovative measures to prepare the economy to pivot into the future. It's demonstrated its commitment and dedication to the general public. I would like to talk about the temporary unemployment scheme. Amidst the fifth wave of the pandemic, he finally agreed to set up this TUR. Back in early 2020, the FTU urged the government to offer unemployment assistance. Even though that we have to wait till the fifth wave before the government finally acted. Well, for the government to, by launching the enterprise support scheme and the 100% guaranteed loan scheme, the government is still deserved our credit. Well, the COVID-19 is raging through the world. A lot of the workers are unemployed or underemployed. It's been raging for too long. A lot of the families is down to their last cent. The grassroots are doing very tough. When the pandemic is fluctuating, our unemployment rate fluctuates as well. Recently, it's now arrived at 5%, the peak in 8 months with over 180,000 unemployed. The TUR reserved $3 billion for the unemployed. As of the deadline, they received 470,000 persons, exceeded the expectations of 300,000 applications. It seems that there's a lot of families in need of help. In terms of approval, the progress has been quick. For the first batch of applicants already dispersed with the funds, and the second batch received the amount as well. These one-off relief measures will not fully address the needs of the unemployed. The FTU continue to lobby for a regular and systematic unemployment support regime. Like we advocated, at least it should offer 6 months of unemployment assistance. The government should also listen to our views. Since the eligibility of the TUR is capped at those of a monthly salary of under $30,000, a lot of the middle salary range applicants were denied or refused applications. We're all on the same boat. For those who are unemployed or underemployed, they couldn't meet their expenses, and they have exhausted their savings. Why I'm not eligible for the relief if I would pass the threshold? That was the question asked by many frontline workers. The ESS relaxed the salary limit. Why we can do so for the ESS while the TUR cannot ease the threshold? Is that because different departments have not coordinated, which led to this misalignment? And led the society to doubt that while the ESS has no ceiling which is offered to boss, why there's so many strings attached to the TUR? And for the cumulative rates regime, as well as a tax deduction for rental expenses, as well as the temporary reprieve of rental arrears. The FTU welcomed the Secretary have taken our views on board by offering tax deduction for rental expenses. For this suggestion, we have proposed it for over 10 years. In each year's budget or policy address, we have delivered in our submissions has finally come to reality after more than a decade. As for the introduction of a 3-tier progressive rates regime, we also welcome this proposal. Even though they will not bring in a lot of revenue, however, the significance of reform is clear. While they will achieve the fair distribution of wealth by having those paying can afford to pay more. For the salary checks, there are 5 tax bands. For rates, by introducing the 3-tier regime, even though it implemented in 2 years' time, there will be 3 tiers. Why the profit checks only contain 2 tiers? We suggest that the profit checks should adopt this. Those who pay more, but those more profitable enterprises can pay more of their share. And under the rent concession mechanism, well, in the past, some of the owners owned multiple properties and entitled to more of the refund. For 21 to 2022, for the top 100 rates payer, only 100 of those, they owned 1,900 and 400 properties. So that they have to raise a weight for this many units. And coming up, the only one natural person can have the rates reduced for just one property. The FTU support this enhancement. Therefore, the owners will not receive multiple concessions. But the government also provides a 3-month protection period from legal action for rental defaults. This will offer some relief for the tenants in difficulty. What happened after the protection period? After this debate on the Appropriation Bill, we shall move on the debate to the Amendment Bill. I will save the details when I come to the next debate. Next on civil servants' rights. And some of the projects or initiatives are not mentioned. For example, on improving civil servants' terms of service. In 2022, as of September, to the 9 months, over 2,800 civil servants resigned. Compared to last year, the increase of 50%. Which compose about 1% of the civil service establishment, a new peak since reunification. The government should consider how to retain the civil servants while maintaining morale. Well, the civil servants, as the backbone of governance, would expect them to more than doing a job. The government, as an employer, cannot just clutch onto the purse strings. To provide quality public service is the natural obligation of the government. The government should put in more effort to retain and attract talent. Take the anti-epidemic work, for example. The civil servants bore their primary responsibility and has been working around the clock. That for the colleagues responsible for the out-of-the operations, they need to work around the clock. They need to conduct out-of-the operations on top of their normal working hours. We've asked them whether they were able to take a day off. The answer is no. I know that they're more than willing to devote their time. Why can't the government offer more appreciation? While the government always advocated for prudent management of resources, does that mean that we should rule out a pragmatic need of expenditure? It's better than for the government to resort to outsourced workers. I look for the government to attend public priorities and deploy resources wisely to improve our livelihood. Thank you. Next, Mr. Lemon Kwong. Thank you, President. this budget this year proposed a number of relief measures and economic stimuli. I'd like to thank the Secretary has taken on board of many of our suggestions, for example, launching the e-consumption voucher and boosting resources on anti-epidemic supplies, as well as those citizens on Social Security by offering extra amount, and also relaxing the threshold on the working family allowance to meet the part of the expenditure. Enhance support for SMEs financing scheme, and also offering tax breaks and waiving the residential rates, and while enhancing harborfront development. The fifth wave pandemic has slightly eased but has not completely gone away. The external economy is full of uncertainty. Our economy is battered in a state of frozen. Our industries and sectors are hard hit. The government revenue has also plummeted. In face of staring deficit, not only we have to sustain our war against the epidemic, we need to also start to reinvent the economy. Well, no matter what criticism you have, what's the budget, I'm glad to see the LegCo and the public and offer constructive advice to overcome any difficulties. In terms of the relief measures, the most talked about will be the e-consumption voucher, which reduce the expenditure burden while stimulating local consumption. A lot of disadvantaged groups, including the elderly, complain to me that it's difficult to use the e-consumption voucher. The Singapore government to fulfill the smart missions by mobilizing the schools to teach the elderly to use a mobile payment in phones, as well as launching digital learning activities. This is something that the government can learn to bring Hong Kong truly into the digital age. A lot of the merchants can not offer mobile terminal. They still only take cash. Developed e-payment terminals can help the operators enhance the efficiency. From procurement, payment no longer restricted by time and geography. The government can make use of the voucher to help those who have yet to provide electronic payment forms. By using the data and experience of the e-consumption voucher, the government can build a tech-savvy operating environment, and that would help to use technology to implement more post-livelihood measures. This year's budget issued a one-off $10,000 temporary unemployment relief, as well as enhancing the 100% guaranteed loan scheme. This is a timely relief which we give the government the credit for. Well, however, the fifth wave epidemic has ruined the economy. A lot of companies have actually closed or ordered their staff to go on no-pay leave. Even though the HKMA encouraged the banks to launch payment principal moratorium. However, this is simply a drop in the ocean. Hope that the government can learn from the mainland municipal governments and Taiwan to support homeowners, for example, and offer a interest-free loan guarantee in order to avoid default. I'm glad to see there are considerable links in the budget devoted in mentioning that Hong Kong will actively integrate into the national development framework. Well, for the Northern Metropolis strategy, the budget mentions that from that will reserve 100 billion in the future funds to accelerate the building of infrastructure in the Northern Metropolis. According to the Better Hong Kong Fund research, the bottleneck of the housing supply involves the approval process. Currently, there are repeated consultations and lack of permission clarity, which lengthen the development timeframe. In taking forward Lantau tomorrow in Northern Metropolis, it will involve reclamation and engineering study. There will be complex statutory procedures expected. However, the reality do not allow the government to move at a snail pace. Therefore, simplifying statutory procedures, the government should review the relevant ordinances with the goal of shortening the time for going through the procedures, and should submit an amendment proposal to LegCo as soon as possible. I hope that the government can expedite the infrastructure projects for the two mega projects to achieve the goal of allocating public housing units after 3 years of waiting time. The government will also step up community support and residential care for the elderly and the disabled and children. The recurring expenditure costs over $1.9 billion. Despite this huge allocation from the residential children's home as well as the outbreak in the RCHEs, the public cast doubts on the supervision and effective use of money as well as the protection of the elderly and the disabled. The government should come up with concrete measures in scrutinizing the efficiency and quality of the policies, as well as strengthening supervision of the agencies. President, I hope that the government continue to listen some of the suggestions not adopted. For example, raising the health culture limit by lowering the eligibility age of 60, allowing the couples to use the voucher together, as well as set up the elderly dental plan, as well as relaxing the eligibility of the old age living allowance to all of the mainland. While the budget failed to set up the children's healthcare voucher as well as paying rent for PRH tenants, and no resources for mobile dental vehicle, which I'm quite disappointed. In terms of environmental hygiene, on the expenditure on rodent control in 2019 to $663 million, and last year risen to $730 million, an increase of 10.3% compared to 2017 of $569 million, while the cost of catching each rat exceeds $10,000. This year, the expenditure of rodent control further climbed to $750 million. According to FEHD, the Yaoqing district, in 2021, the rodent index is about 8.7, the worst in Hong Kong. In Sam Shui Po district, is now at 5.2. Recently, government devoted more resources on rodent control by adding more manpower and money. However, this is poor investment. From the rodent index rise, and also the rat-infested houses in housing estates have been creating a nuisance to the neighbors. This shows that the government has been ineffective in controlling the rodents. Well, the money been spent, but the rodents are still around. While the government allocated millions of dollars year on year, we must review the resource allocation by deploying technology and equipment, by setting up relevant KPIs, introducing the public-private partnerships, adopting a same mindset to improve our environmental hygiene, to enhance our living environment. The budget proposed measures to deepen mainland Hong Kong cooperation under one country, two systems. We are interdependent with the mainland. We should seize the opportunity to make sure use of our advantages to help the companies and young entrepreneurs to tap into the mainland market, and provide training opportunities to meet with the national development objectives, as well as to fulfill the roles given by under the 14th Review Plan to enhance our competitiveness. While releasing the budget, the FS mentioned to integrate into the National Development Network is the path to take. No matter which term of government, that will be the key direction for Hong Kong economy. President, I so submit to support the Appropriation Bill 2022.
Mr. Tony Chair. Thank you, President. I speak in support of the Appropriation Bill 2022. That is the second reading of the 22-23 budget. Last year, when the Financial Secretary conduct a consultation on the budget. For many months, there were no confirmed cases in Hong Kong. There was strong rebound of the recovery, employment rate dropped, and we were about to see the resumption of cross-boundary travel. But then, with the fifth wave of the epidemic, our economy took a drastic turn for the worse, and in the budget, again, there is need to inject funds into the anti-epidemic fund, and then there are billions of dollars reserved for the procurement of vaccines and so on, and medication. And then, unfortunately, with the hard work of the concerted effort of the government and the community, we're seeing a drop in the number of cases. Economic activities are slowly resuming. But then the government must not let down its guard. We have to speed up development and revive our economy. We also need to plan for return to normalcy. As I pointed out on the day when the budget was delivered, I said that this budget was able to take account of the impact of the epidemic, the need to revive the economy, and also to help the people tide over this tough time. So there are four key directions mentioned in the budget, and then various stepping up anti-epidemic efforts, relieving people's hardship, supporting enterprises, and so on. And so the various measures have been put forward, and that will help the public to join hands in fighting epidemic. My proposal to offer tax rebate on rental expenses, I'm glad that the Financial Secretary has taken that and brought on finally after many years. And then I've also, my sector have proposed various other tax relief measures. For example, a tax concession relief measures. For example, issuing consumption voucher, giving tax concessions for salaries tax and performance tax, and also rates concession. And also for those who can afford to pay more, they should pay more as we reform the rates system. So all these measures have been taken on board too. And then there's a pilot scheme for financing for infrastructure project. And then $10 billion are set aside for the development, $100 billion are set aside for the development of the northern metropolis. There are also ways to explore how we could take forward to Lantau tomorrow and other major infrastructure projects. And then we need to stimulate the economy to create jobs. That's very important. The impact of the bad epidemic may last 3 years or more. But then when we talk about infrastructure projects, we're talking about a time frame of 10, 20, or even 30 years. They're very important for our long-term development. So we must not delay or even shelve these projects because we have short-term economic hardship. But then if we want to increase land supply, we want to stabilize property prices, we want the waiting list for public housing to be 3 years, and we want to eradicate subdivided units. Now, just spending money is not enough. The government needs to formulate plans. There has to be an effective way to achieve these targets. Now, at the special meetings of the Finance Committee, I and many members criticized the government for its many policies and development projects. They mention these projects and then it's as if these projects have been completed. So the government is spending money, but then the public are not able to see the results. For example, I've always been monitoring the development of public housing units. Also, I've suggested we make good use of civil service housing and so on. And then recently, there's this project for Yuen Long South development, and then the reprovisioning of the 3 Wan Chai government towers. You know, there's many such projects that have seen delays for at least 5 years, and in some cases 10, 20 years. And so the government's really big waster on land resources. And at the same time, we see the waiting list for public housing continues to lengthen, the waiting time continues to lengthen, and we still see subdivided units. So the government's not able to achieve its targets. Now, we need to make sure Hong Kong has competitiveness. And most importantly, we need to nurture talent and promote innovation and technology. There are many measures proposed, for example, giving $1 billion to the Construction Industry Council to step up training, and also there is some increase in the subsidy amount for continuing education fund under the continuing education and so on. But then the government has not responded to my suggestion to increase the number of subsidized university places. So we wonder if Hong Kong have enough manpower, talents to take forward the many large infrastructure projects in Hong Kong. Now we need to train local talents. We need to retain foreign talents, and it's important that we retain local professionals too. One of the key issues is about reforming the procurement and tendering system. So we should avoid adopting the lowest bid system, because then there would just be cutthroat competition, but without while we sacrifice quality. And also we could streamline some of the less efficient control processes, and then we have to support the development of SMEs and so on now. And the council meeting, I'm going to move a motion debate next month. I hope members will support my motion. And I want a detailed and concrete response from the government too. On research and innovation, now the budget proposes injecting $1.2 billion in the Construction Innovation Fund. And then there will also be money set aside for using new materials, and also promotion of the MIC method. And I think we should support all these measures. Then the budget also proposes using $600 million for electronic auditing, but this project will take 3 years to be completed. So the government is trying to promote smart government and enhance its governance. But if it takes 3 years, is the government dragging its feet, really? Now, because of the Russia-Ukraine war, many countries are seeing increase in inflation. In Hong Kong, inflation remains mild to some extent. It's because property prices and rentals have come down in recent months. But then for the general public, especially those in the grassroots sector and those living in public housing, they can see that they can certainly feel the severe impact of inflation. So the electronic consumption vouchers would help them in the short term. But at the same time, it may cause prices to go up further. And then such short-term relief measures cannot be sustained, really. Last year, the government recorded a surplus rather than a deficit, but that's actually is not the true picture. It's because the government is booking revenues from investment and so on, and other investment return, but actually government has still a surplus, a deficit of some $60 billion. So with any relief measures the government is proposing, it has to consider where it gets the funds to do so. We want to improve people's livelihood. We want to maintain a healthy revenue for the government. So to do that, we have to promote economic development. Now, the budget proposes a people-oriented approach. It says that we have to have quality economic growth, and then we could create more quality jobs, and then the public could rely on themselves and prosper. So this is the right direction, but doesn't matter who will be the next financial secretary. We must still move in this direction. So I submit. Mr. Chen Pui-Leung. On the 23rd of February, the Financial Secretary delivered the last budget of this term of the government. On the whole, this budget covers various aspects, and there are timely relief measures. And with limited financial resources, government is trying to make the most of these resources. So in principle, I support the budget, the 2022-23 budget. In the past 2 years, the Hong Kong's economy and global economy have been hard hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. The fifth wave was particularly serious. It dealt a severe blow to our economy. So we need to fight the epidemic. We need to offer relief to the public. This remain the priorities of the budget. Now, there are $170 billion of counter-cyclical measures, and then there are another $40 billion on anti-epidemic effort. Now, of course, in the society, in the community, different sectors face different difficulties. So how can we still use resources in a scientific and sustainable manner? This is important. In the financial year 2021-22, the government's revenue was $682.5 billion, which is 21% more than the previous year. That's because there's some substantial increase in land revenue and stamp duty revenue. So when we have a surplus for people aged 18 who are permanent residents in Hong Kong, they'll be issued with $10,000 of electronic consumption voucher, and that's right. But then at the same time, with the growth in revenue, does it show that we have healthy public financial status? Now, we have a narrow tax base. The government has stressed time and again it's going to address this issue. Now, in the latest budget, perhaps it's because of the uncertainties brought about by the pandemic. That's why there's no mention of further plans on working on the narrow tax base issue. But then we need to maintain stable income for the government. So 2 new measures are proposed in the budget this year. There will be a progressive rate system for residential properties. So in light of the principle of those who can afford should pay more. At the same time, there will be tax for multinational companies. So this is to make sure we still have a simple and low tax rate at the same time, and make sure the government has stable income. Now, about 80% of the government revenue is operating revenue, and the remaining 20% is capital revenue. Now, but then we see that investment revenue and stamp duty revenue are making up a bigger portion of government revenue. But then that will lead to more uncertainties. So on government revenue, in the latest budget, healthcare and welfare spending make up the 2 highest spending items. But then the projection is that between 2019 and 2040, the population of those aged 65 above will increase because of the aging population. And then with this demographic change, that means the government will have to invest more in healthcare and welfare. And then in recent years, there's continuous increase in recurrence expenditure. So the public are concerned about public finances. Now, the reserve is $946.7 billion at 6 months of government expenditure. So that is actually lower than the level of 20 months of expenditure some years ago. That shows that our public finances are not as sound as before. We don't have as big a reserve. So without affecting people's livelihood, how do we make savings and also generate new sources of revenue? That's important. The Financial Secretary pointed out that in the past 2 years, the government has spent over $480 billion on anti-epidemic effort. Now, in extraordinary times, we are digging into our reserve to support the public and fight the epidemic, and this is essential in modern society. But then the impact of the epidemic in 2020 was about $200 billion on the economy. Last year, $100 billion. Now, we practice free market, and many have complained the government's fiscal policy has been passive and conservative. And we cannot rule out structural deficit in Hong Kong. So what should be the right level of the fiscal reserve in terms of the number of months of spending? And how do we address deep-rooted social conflicts? These are all issues that the government have to consider carefully. Since 1843, Hong Kong has been using the same accounting model, and then it's remained unchanged since 1997. According to Articles 107 and 108 of the Basic Law, we have to keep spending within the limits of income and so on. And this term, the government said that there will be new fiscal philosophy, but then unfortunately because of social movement and COVID pandemic, the government has actually not made much change in the way it manages public finances. But then this budget is unique still in some ways. That is the attention paid to the Future Fund. That's positive and new development for the government. Now, the Future Fund will bring investment return to government's account. And then the budget proposes the new innovation fund and also GBA fund, and that will certainly help Hong Kong to develop further as an international financial center and so on. Now the new government will come into office in in about 2 months. So I hope in the face of the pandemic and tax reform challenges and so on, that we will continue to integrate into national development and the dual circulation, and then bring Hong Kong out of its plight. And also we could reduce the risk of structural deficit. I hope that's what the new government do, and then the new government should also review the existing public the taxation policy, especially it has to do something about a narrow tax base. So I speak in support of the Appropriation Bill 2022.
Ms. Chen Ho-yen. Thank you, Mr. President. This is beyond doubt. The COVID-19 pandemic has hit people's livelihood and our economy hard. So I agree with the Financial Secretary that in this budget there should be more relief measures to lift the burden on people, and these include $170 billion anti-cyclical measures, and that the government has been generous and whilst making sure that money is well spent. At the same time, we need to acknowledge the Financial Secretary's commitment. Apart from tax concessions and various social and cash allowances and subsidies, I'd also like to speak on the other suggestions that I've previously made to the government. First, in relation to tax concessions for expenses for for renting domestic properties. In the past, I put forward to the government this idea that there should be tax deduction for tenants who have rented properties, and that the tenancies have been stamped. And in the past 2 years, the middle class and the grassroots have equally been affected by the epidemic. And this new measure is a response to the plight of the 400,000 tenants in Hong Kong, so that their burden is lessened. Meanwhile, the government should pay attention to the outcome, including possible increase in rental level, to make sure that the tax breaks would truly benefit rentees instead of letting landlords pocket the extra. The other measure winning the hearts of the people is the consumption voucher scheme. Last year, the amount was just $5,000. This year is $10,000. Back in 2020, during the 2020 budget consultation, our team suggested to the Financial Secretary that consumption vouchers should be distributed. Back then, the suggestion was a cash payout, but last year we had the consumption voucher scheme. Now we understand that these two schemes have a similar but not identical effect. At least these two schemes seek to provide financial relief to the needy citizens. And these two schemes seek to provide stimulus to our market, especially for the consumption voucher scheme. Last year, many sectors were affected by the epidemic. Many businesses had their operations suspended or even closed down. According to statistics, private consumption spending last year rebounded by 5.6%, is against the original downward trend estimated. That shows the effect of the consumption voucher scheme. This year, the budget has increased the amount of the vouchers to $10,000. We expect that if not doubling the effect last year, we should continue with the rising trend of private consumption spending. The increase in private spending is because members of the public are fatigued as a result of fighting the epidemic. It's kind of so-called revenge spending. But I need to ask everyone to be vigilant. It is not healthy as far as our economy is concerned. If we only have ups and downs in our economy, we need to have a stable economic development instead of revenge spending, so as to put the economic development to the right track. In the past 2 years, not only our people were affected, our public coffers were affected as well. According to the figures in 2020 and 2021, the consolidated deficit was $257.6 billion. That's a record high. And for the revised estimates in 2020, although we recorded a surplus, the Financial Secretary again projected the $56 billion deficit, and the fiscal reserves would further drop to $980 billion, equivalent to 13 months of government spending only. I want to emphasize that if we continue to rely government largesse to provide economic stimulus, it's not the solution. Healthcare problems can bring a lot of resource implications to the public coffers. It has to be dealt with carefully. In fact, in recent years, there are three major spending areas: education, social welfare, and health. And in recent years, there's been significant increase in healthcare spending. Last year, in fact, health spending increased to $115.8 billion, exceeding $110.9 billion of education spending, which is just after $120.6 billion of spending on social welfare. This year, health spending increased substantially to $162 billion. This is based on the usual spending of, the recurrent spending, $110 billion, together with $54 billion spent on non-recurrent spending to fight the COVID-19 epidemic. This is inevitable, but we need to remind ourselves that health spending is hefty. It is necessary. As I've mentioned, in the past 10 years, health spending has continued to increase. For HA allocation in a 10-year period, it increased by 100%. If we don't find a proper solution in face of the aging population, inevitably health spending will become a major weakness of government spending. Now, we need to be mindful about the problem with our public healthcare system. COVID-19 pandemic actually reveals our problems. We all remember during the peak of the fifth wave, a lot of patients were waiting at home without being able to be admitted in the hospital. And there were also many patients, even patients on hospital beds and stretchers outside hospital. And there were patients sharing the same ward with the bodies of the deceased in the hospital. If we don't improve the public healthcare system in a timely manner, as we continue to see an increased demand for public health care because of the aging population, we're going to see more and more such tragedies. And that is why I urge the government to allocate more resources for primary health care, and that the focus should be on prevention rather than treatment. There should also be proper triage of patients at the community level to prevent hospitals from being overcrowded. Finally, on healthcare manpower, I'd like to speak on planning and resource allocation. We need manpower to provide healthcare services. In this year's budget, starting from next year, funding will be increased up to $400 million to enhance healthcare manpower training. I agree that more resources should be allocated for the purpose. However, apart from resources, we also need to have a proper system set up with a vision to solve the long-term manpower issue. In fact, I've always suggested to the government that we should make good use of Chinese medicine practitioners and allied health professionals to address the manpower shortage. They have professional knowledge and they can give full play to their abilities in treating chronically ill patients so that patients can receive good care and we can achieve win-win. For Chinese medicine practitioners, many COVID rehabilitants are suffering from long COVID symptoms and they prefer using Chinese medicine to recuperate. After all, we are a Chinese society. We have high level of acceptance for Chinese medical practitioners, and if we focus on developing Chinese medicine in Hong Kong, I believe they will contribute to our healthcare system greatly in the future. I hope that this is just a starting point. That is for Chinese medicine practitioners to join our healthcare system. Your time is up, Mr. Chen Hanpan. Madam Deputy. In this year's budget, there are three main points about transportation. One is public transport subsidy scheme and also strategic transport study and also EV charging at home subsidy scheme. I support all three initiatives. For the for the public transport fare subsidy scheme, the threshold has been lowered from $400 to $200, drawing on DAB's suggestion. In fact, the government subsidizes ferry services. For other public transport operators, it's the public that support them financially. We understand that many public transport operators are operating at a loss of close to $200–300 million a year, and that is why there are fare increases every year. For some franchise bus companies, they even ask for over 10% increase and also subsequent fare hikes. So if fare income is the only source of revenue, the public will need to pay expensive transport expenses. It's good that we have the public transport subsidy scheme. However, the threshold will only be lowered to $200 for a few months. We suggest that this public transport fare subsidy scheme be regularized so that in the long term the public will have their burdens relieved so that we don't need to pay for expensive transport fares. If there is a scheme for 3 million people in Hong Kong to benefit from it, it is of course a good deed. However, if the threshold is $400, then only 900,000 commuters would benefit, and that the scheme is not extensive enough. Well, at the Special FC Committee meeting, the Secretary for Transport and Housing mentioned an infrastructure-led approach, which is easy to understand. That is to say, in new development areas, infrastructure will be provided. The government in recent years have been pondering on the Northern Metropolis strategy, and there should be advanced planning for infrastructure and railway lines. However, for Tung Chung, Kutong North, Hung Shui Kiu, NDAs, we haven't seen any infrastructure-led approach being adopted. Very often, infrastructure isn't provided until way after there has been population intake. As for creating capacity, this is the same as the idea I put forward earlier, that is reshaping our transport system. We need to adopt a mindset to resolve long-term traffic issues in Hong Kong, especially traffic congestion. The government has passed the right judgment, only that the approach is not correct. For example, when it comes to the construction of roads and other initiatives such as road charging, I don't think this will help the government achieve the objective. We should not just build roads. If we build new roads, it will just be catching up. In fact, we need to implement interchange concession schemes and provide subsidies. I suggested park and ride facilities allowing concessions, but the government did not respond to me. And in fact, some government officials have told me that they would need to complete the transport strategy study first, traffic and transport strategy study first. By then, it will be too late. Now, if my idea is accepted by the next term of government, then I'm in full support of the new bureau being set up. The current government hasn't paid enough attention to transport and traffic because housing seems more important to the Transport and Housing Bureau. If we're able to set up a Transport and Logistics Bureau in the next term of government, I hope the new bureau will be able to rationalize the following issues. First, there is a mismatch for the logistics sector in Hong Kong. The biggest pressure facing the logistics sector is the container terminal. However, the container terminal at the moment is situated in the middle of Hong Kong, is in a built-up area. Every day we have heavy container trucks plying the area, and then they also carry the containers to different areas, container yards in Tuen Mun, etc., for cargo handling. This is the biggest mismatch because the logistics sector is unable to find a suitable piece of land in the urban area. That is why the container yards are usually set up on the northern part of Hong Kong in the remote new territories. And the whole transportation in the logistics sectors are constrained as a result of the container terminal's location. It also creates air pollution, it wastes journey time, and it causes traffic congestion. All these hamper the development of the logistics sector. So if there is reorganization of government structure with a new bureau, we hope that this can be rationalized. The container terminal should also be relocated. The second issue is that the traffic congestion issue should be resolved. Earlier, the government proposed rationalization of the 3 cross-harbour tunnels. According to the government's plan, this would result in congestion for all 3 tunnels. Say if we lower the tolls for Western Harbour Crossing and we raise the tolls for the harbour crossing in the middle, this would only divert traffic to other tunnels, causing congestion at all 3 harbour crossings. We need to have the prerequisite ready, and that is a flexible mode of tunnel tolls. Last year, I put forward this suggestion. There should be different tunnel tolls for different periods of time to avoid heavy traffic during peak hours, so as to address the issue of traffic congestion. Next year, the franchise of Western Harbour Crossing on the 1st of August will come to an end, but I so far haven't heard of any plan after the government takes back Western Harbour Crossing. Apart from calls from the community to lower the tolls at WHC, I hope the government can come up with a comprehensive plan to address the issue of traffic congestion. I hope the government will consider my suggestion. The third issue is to have a rethink of the concept of road pricing. Well, congestion charging, this idea has been put forward by the government, but I think it's too simplistic to say that there should be charges for congestion, roads with congestion, because people will get used to it and sooner or later congestion will resume. It's just like your blood vessels are blocked. You can't have quick fixes. You need to have long-term changes in terms of your daily habits, your diet, law enforcement, in other words, to address the issue. Now, traffic congestion is not a dead end. In fact, with Hong Kong Wan Chai Bypass commissioned, traffic congestion along Gloucester Road already reduced by 27% immediately. So there are solutions to traffic congestion, but congestion charging is not the only solution. I hope the next term of government would think afresh so that we have a good transportation system while addressing the issue of traffic congestion. It's a waste of time. I so submit.
Mr. Duncan Chu. Thank you, Deputy. The latest budget touched on IT in fintech and tech and smart port and agricultural sector making use of tech as well as the e-government. The government has taken IT development seriously. To the IT sector, this is a huge encouragement. All in all, I support this Appropriation Bill 2022. The fifth pandemic shattered Hong Kong economy. Lots of companies is on the brink of collapse, including the SMEs, tech enterprises. In early March, I conducted a questionnaire surveys. 72% of the respondents claimed that the pandemic have caused $1 to $5 million of loss, and 65% of respondents claimed that the financing was affected by the pandemic, and 42% estimated that the fifth wave would cause a 6-year impact to the business, and 63% see that the impact will last more than a year. Some are mistaken that the pandemic will bring new business to the IT sector. This is not the case. A lot of the SMEs and startups suffered a drop in business. And 2 years ago, the launch of Tech Voucher and the Distance Business Program at the beginning of the pandemic, this was a blessing to the sector. As the pandemic drags on, these two programs has dispensed a lot of demand of technology. A lot of companies have completed their digital upgrade using the vouchers. I was told that the stimulus to the IT sector has since reduced. In the face of a bitter winter, the IT companies do not get in business, and yet they don't want or reluctant to conduct layoffs, as there is a talent fight for talent. They're afraid they could not replenish their staff. For the SMEs are doing very tough at the moment. Once again, I appeal to the government to review the tech vouchers and other funding schemes. There's a lot of the applications with the amount being held up. I hope that they could be dispersed ASAP, not as to affect the liquidity of the companies. And after the pandemic, it can increase allocations to departments to procure or try local IT products. And enhancing the 100% special loan guarantee scheme, as well as the payment holiday, providing 6 months 65% rental concession to cyberport tenants, are a very effective relief in the short to medium term. The Evans mentioned about setting up a $5 billion IT fund and the $5 billion GBA investment fund. I suppose that this will be the Hong Kong version of Temasek Holdings, and it has been the perennial appeal of the sector. Hope the government can launch the fund soon. Some members mentioned 10 billion is not much compared to Temasek Holdings managing 400 Singaporean dollars, about $2 trillion of Hong Kong dollars. That wasn't much. This is a good start. In running the fund, the government can consider changing of just appointing fund managers. The government can make direct investments. If it continues to appoint other outside fund managers, it should require the fund managers to devote a considerable capital to Hong Kong or GBA tech enterprises to benefit the IT development. In terms of tech IT R&D, the budget set aside 10 billion to promote live tech R&D and boosting the research funding from 8 million to 16 million, and the Sticky Labs as well as the Sticky Research Center Hong Kong branches to an annually $440 million. These measures can help to facilitate IT development. And Hong Kong R&D expenditure is still way too low. In 2021, it's just 0.99% of the GDP, compared to the 2017 CE target of 1.5%, about $45 billion. That was way below target. Compared to GBA in the mainland cities, Shenzhen and Dongguan, the IT input made up of 5.2 and 3.24% respectively. Thus, Hong Kong has a lot of catch up to do. Even though the CE and the secretaries stressed many times that this term government devoted 170 billion to promote IT, the government failed to disclose about more than half of those spent on infrastructure. The actual R&D expenditure is about 1/4 of that. Not only there's a public research was weak, and so is the private sector in GBA cities. When the Shenzhen private R&D expenditure made up 93%, and Hong Kong is around 42%. How do we boost a private R&D expenditure is one of the key tasks of the government. Early this year, I proposed to the FS that the super tax concession be extended to private investment to IT. For every investment made on local IT enterprises, they will receive the same amount or higher proportion of tax refund. The government can set restrictions to prevent abuse and guarantee the quality of investing companies. For example, the private capital can only be invested into a cyberport or a science park. Startup enterprises, the companies must be owned by a third party, or there'll be a cap on the tax refund. The government should expedite the vetting of the various funding schemes as they're taking too long. I hope the next term government can take drastic measures to boost R&D expenditure to catch up with our neighbors, and take on board a suggestion to expand the coverage of the super tax refund scheme so as to encourage more private enterprises to invest on research and invest in local IT companies. Deputy, to promote capital output and the training of talent are just as important. A lot of the members have spoken about on talent. Hong Kong need to introduce more tech talent. We have this tech admission scheme. 610 quota approved as of now. Only 283 issued visas from the latest figures. At the special FC meeting, I followed up with the Immigration Department, hope that they can expedite the granting of visas to allow the mainland and overseas experts arriving to Hong Kong. I also hope the government could review the various tech admission schemes and relax the eligibility of some. For example, should we only allow graduates from top 100 universities to become part of the tech talent list? I heard a lot of the applicants have very sound credentials, but they may not be in the top 100 universities. Can we relax the criteria? And should the visa be attached to a quota system instead of tied to a names, which will length? I hope that we can just adopt a quota system instead of individual basis. As for the $600 million for e-government initiatives, early this year, that we should set up a tech procurement and application scoring system under the efficiency unit to review department use of technology as well as the efficiency, which match the goal of how the $600 million will be spent. The audit will be conducted in Q2 this year. It's anticipated by 2022-23, while Q1 there will be an enhanced scoring system. By then, that we can launch the electronic audit as soon as possible, and hope that you can tap into the tech-savvy experts into this. For example, those in the IT sector and organizations, which will help to speed up the whole audit process. And I hope that the SFC and the HKEX can review the GM and the main board listing criteria to attract high-tech companies who are pre-profit but with bright potential to come to Hong Kong to listing, to raise capital, to provide for fundraising capabilities and attracting more high-tech companies in Hong Kong. I look forward to the next term government can draft a long-term tech development blueprint as objective set up as mid to long-term KPIs to turn Hong Kong into truly a smart city and international IT hub. I so submit. I support the Appropriation Bill 2022. Next, Ms. Judy Chan. Thank you, Deputy. I support the Financial Secretary's budget. Well, the budget was unveiled on 23rd of February, and 2 months afterwards, well, to cope with the pandemic, the society has changed from top to bottom. A lot of the premises to comply with the government's social distancing measures, they reluctantly close up. A lot of the premises, even operating, are not enjoying any heavy patronage. A lot of the companies, despite government subsidies, could not sustain their business, and only forced to close, and the unemployment rate shot up. The latest unemployment rate is 5%. Only reflected the figures from January to March. Secretary Logic Kwong expect the unemployment rate to be announced next month will go higher. The fifth wave powers is well felt by the public. Well, it's fortunate that there's a slight easing of the pandemic, and the daily caseload is around 3 digits, and yesterday there was about 347 confirmed cases, and it shows that the pandemic is gradually under control. The government also eased the social distancing measures. That some of the closed scheduled premises are allowed to reopen. Well, the government dispersed the e-consumption voucher, which stimulate the spending. Within a short time, the retail landscape need more time to recover. However, we're seeing glimmer of hope. We still need to keep in view how our economy is changed. However, in the face of huge trauma, the government we need to look into ways to heal the Hong Kong economy. During the fifth wave, there were many things happening. For example, the RCHE outbreaks, the child abuse in residential homes, the memory was still raw. A lot of people couldn't believe why is it happening in today's Hong Kong. Did give us pause. What's wrong with our society? In considering how to provide and healing our trauma, the government should take a hard look on the proper allocation of resources. The government tried to create a better development space with the budget, but is it spent on the right places? Is it putting the people's first? And really offer targeted assistance to the public so that they can actually feel the government's warmth and support. While people-centric is not a slogan, to truly achieve this, the government should put the public interests first. As the people is at the heart of the society and should be the biggest beneficiary so as to reinforce our long-term stability. For the society to move forward, we must continually seek development while at the same time we can't look the other way for other injustices and shortcomings. We actually need to plug these loopholes and devote resources to them. Well, so as to improve the public livelihoods as a whole. We're glad to see the government have devoted $9.9 billion on enhancing residential care services and social worker services towards the children and the person with disabilities. Well, after 2 years of the epidemic, the multiple episodes exposed the community care resources not only was far below demand and also outdated. There was a lot of unfortunate tragedies which took place. And this have affected the disadvantaged, the elderly, and our next generation. For Hong Kong to become an inclusive society, we must make sure that we can treat elderly well, let the able-bodied to work, and also care for the meek. The government has been applying more resources into social welfare. At the start of this term government, the social welfare recurrent expenditure in 2017 and 18 is about 65.3 billion. In just a few years' time, it shot up for this year's budget with an estimated of $118 billion, an increase of 70%, which exceeded other policy areas. The spike in recurring expenditure does it translate into lifting our day-to-day services? The public may have less of a clear idea. At the last special FC meeting, in terms of family practices, I've asked the Secretary Law on the neighborhood child care support scheme on the expenditure and the estimated budget. That for year 2019 and 2020, there's a reduction of 2,000 service places, and yet the allocation increased by $20 million. The Secretary failed to explain and failed to elaborate on the enhancements. Well, this has really puzzled the public. Well, this year's budget is full of human touches and is forward. The Financial Secretary really designed from his heart, hopefully, to spend the resources to reach those in need in order to improve our economic outlook and encourage everyone to ride out the storm together. I understand that in today's environment, the government need to consider every dollar. It's hard to decide where to spend. In face of difficulty, the government has a duty to review all the problems under the sun. Well, this can really help the public feel that the government really cares for them and know their concerns. I look forward to the government can continue with this humility and sympathy to help our society heal, more proactively understand the hardship faced by all strata in society, or come up with more effective mechanism to gauge the level of government assistance really rendered, as the public is the marker of this budget. I so submit.
Dr. Wendy Hong. Thank you, Madam Deputy. I would like to make a concrete proposal today, and I would like the government to follow up on that. I would suggest that Hong Kong should set up a venture institution to promote diversity of the economic sectors. Now we see a problem of hollowing out of industries, and also we don't have enough diversity. And then Hong Kong was center of elites, but now we are, the people are becoming poorer while the rich are becoming richer. Well, if we see this development, then we have to promote economic transformation. We need to bring about diversity to the industrial structure. And then in the past few decades, we see that we just rely on the market to address the structural problems of Hong Kong is not going to work. The government is not just a facilitator, promoter, or participant. It should also be a government that promotes or leads changes. We cannot avoid that. But where do we start? I would say the starting point is we should first develop certain tools, and then the government could be directly involved in economic development in sector. Now, in recent years, actually, the government has started to explore options, but it's not been making any breakthroughs. The government set up the Future Fund for long-term investment. The aim is to improve the industrial structure in Hong Kong. And then the government also set up the Hong Kong Growth Portfolio. So invest in projects related to development of Hong Kong, such as the new economy, innovation, technology, and so on. And then this year, in the budget, the Financial Secretary has proposed to inject another $10 billion into the growth portfolio, and also to set up the GBA investment and so on. So these are the right measures, but they are far from enough. First, the Future Fund is part of the Exchange Fund, is managed by the Hong Kong Monetary Authority. The Exchange Fund is to maintain the monetary stability of Hong Kong, so we cannot really use the fund to explore new directions and promote changes. So we need to bring in partners to make investment. And then we could, but then that's too conservative. If we want, partners to have, long global perspective and other wide perspectives for the development of Hong Kong, well, it's not realistic. Because if we just have ordinary partners, they will only look at investment return. We cannot use public policy objectives as a measure of their performance. Now, statutory bodies and other government bodies have been plowing in resources to support the development of local venture startups. But then they are rather passive. They wait for applications, or they, in terms of the government is rather passive in planning the development of different sectors. And then there's also, the funds also limited. We can't see, economy of scale. And so it has limited effect in promoting the development of innovation technology and other sectors. Now, we need an important tool, a more direct tool that's more effective, and the government needs to be more proactive. There are many successful examples for consideration in Hong Kong. Singapore, they have Temasek, which is a super state-owned enterprise. And then the government and Shenzhen, they also have a Shenzhen Investment Corporation owned by the Shenzhen municipal government. It helps, it's a useful tool in promoting industrial development. And also in terms of making investment return, it's also very successful. Now, Hong Kong is promoting new growth engines, so we should learn from the practice of our neighbors. Part of the future fund should be used for setting up an investment vehicle. I would call it the Hong Kong Venture Fund. And then with the Strategic Tech Fund and the GBA Investment Fund, the part of that funds could also be injected into this new fund and a new investment vehicle. And then we have shareholders, and then we could have international management team. Now, this is we could then invest in strategic industries and new and emerging industries. And then we'll start from a startup, and then there could be incubation, and then we'll be able to help quality local businesses to grow. I think there's an advantage of setting up this Hong Kong investment this venture company in Hong Kong. We can because if it's a fund set up by the government, there is better able to withstand risk, and then we could invest in industries and businesses that will be good for the long-term development of Hong Kong, and then they could invest in companies with lower return initially, but then they could make up for certain gaps in the market. And then we could help to enrich the industrial structure in Hong Kong, and that will help to promote upward mobility for young people too. And this Hong Kong venture company could also be a tool for the government to become directly involved in helping the development of new growth points. And then there will be actually better potential return for Hong Kong. Now, the Hong Kong government SL government is actually, revising its laissez-faire policy or non-interventionist policy. So this venture company could be a tool for the government to promote economic transformation. It will be a starting point for a new economic model for Hong Kong. So this is a concrete proposal. I put the financial secretary. I would like him to respond to that. Thank you. Ms. Nixie Lam. Madam Deputy, the fifth wave of epidemic is starting to ease, and many say that we're gradually returning to normal. But then for many, we are still a long way from going back to normalcy. There are, like for beauty care sector, they have stopped work for some 300 days, and many have to switch to other trades, and even employers not doing any better. They are just, people, even though if they are open to business again, the customers are still using their old vouchers. Now, the government may have various support measures and AEF as well, but if we want to revive the economy, we can't just rely on the subsidies offered in the budget. Rather, we should allow people to go back to normal operation so they can rely on themselves. Now, in the budget, there are various measures to support SMEs. These measures are essential. They must be rolled out as soon as possible. But as I said, subsidy is far from enough. There are so many sectors that have to, suspend the operation, and then they just wait for government subsidy, and it's been going on for a long time. I don't know how much longer they could survive. For example, we need to review these measures so that they will be more precise, and then we could help these sectors to come out of this vicious circle. Now, about investing into the future of Hong Kong. We've had this pandemic for some 2 years. Traditional pillar industries have been hard hit. Although the pandemic eased sometime last year, but then our economy did not recover as expected. That's because we don't have enough diversity in our economic structure. So now, what should be our focus? That is something the budget should address. I see that in the budget, when it comes to the development of innovation and technology sector, in paragraphs 91 to 96, the government said that it's going to promote this area, and in particular promoting the development of cultural industry. But it's not just about throwing money at it. We need a market, we need investment in talent training and so on. If the government wants to promote the development of the cultural industries, there has to be a strategy to take advantage of our unique advantages. And then we could help Hong Kong with this economic transformation as the first step. Now, in other countries where they've been successful in economic transformation, especially in relation to cultural industries, they have a comprehensive strategy, and they use cultural industries to promote tourism and so on. So we have to turn this whole thing into something that makes money, and then it's a success. Now, in the 14th Five-Year Plan, there's support for Hong Kong to become an international cultural hub between the East and West. So that's unique advantage for Hong Kong. So the countries have been helping us, and so for us, we have to consider how we could help our country to enhance our soft power in this complicated global environment. Now, and there's also mention of an international trading platform for cultural development. That's important, Now, this is about turning arts pieces into financial tool, such as funds, insurance, banking services. They could all be linked to arts products, and that's important. Well, this is something what the Western market has been doing all along. For many international financial companies, they have this. Now, for financing of art pieces, that's potential value of $400 billion, but only so far half of that value has been realized. So there's still much room for development. So can Hong Kong do something here? Can Hong Kong become the leading center in Asia? And how could we become the arts financial center? Now, there are various rules to regulate arts trading platforms. And that's actually a way to promote arts development. Hong Kong is an East and West cultural center, so we take advantage of that, and then we could, integrate with the international market, and we create an enabling business environment. Then there's room for development. Now, next on technology, in the budget, funds have been set aside for promoting fintech, for art tech rather. Now, if we talk about a policy in supporting arts tech, we are lagging behind. We need to catch up. We need to come up with a policy blueprint that suits Hong Kong. We need to state our vision. Paragraph 140 of the budget, it says here that the government has reviewed the talents of Hong Kong under the Quality Migrant Admission Scheme, and it's also expanded the list to cover fintech professionals. But what about our own talents? We need to enhance STEM education, and we have to add A, that is arts, and make it STEAM education. So we need to train students this way, and then we will have better room for development. And then young people here will see a future and a different career path, and then we don't have to worry about local talents. As the presidency pointed out with education, we have to first make sure what kind of talents we want to train and how we should train these talents. We are talking about a new era of Hong Kong. We need to cast aside our traditional mindset. If you think culture is not going to make money, no, it's not true. It's got huge potential. And then we could also create new values from traditional industries. We have to seize upon this opportunity in promoting cultural industries, and that will be the next golden decade for Hong Kong.
Mr. Stanley Ng. Madam Deputy, I think that this year's budget should receive a passing mark. It's just appropriate, especially the relief measures in it would help tide people over their difficulties, especially in terms of job creation and consumption voucher scheme. I'm in all support of these. In terms of medium to long-term planning, there are paragraphs relating to industrial developments, but in terms of integration with our country, I think the government should be more proactive. More thoughts should be put into it. In the medium to long term, how do we create a more secure labor market and address housing issues? I think the government should do more. The Financial Secretary took on board some of FTU's suggestions in his budget, such as $10,000 consumption voucher scheme and tax deduction for rental expenses. I hope the government will continue to heed our views. And all in all, the FTU supports this budget and supports the Appropriation Bill 2022. I'd like to offer my views in the following. First, about the poverty gap. The budget proposes one-off relief measures such as tax concessions, allowances, rental enforcement moratorium, and consumption voucher scheme. All these would help relieve people's burden. However, these are, after all, one-off measures. They are not designed to tackle long-term problems. With the epidemic subsiding, our economy is on the path of recovery, and time is ripe for the government to have medium to long-term planning so that members of the public can share the fruits of economic development. The Financial Secretary also proposed in this year's budget that the purpose of having economic development is to improve the livelihood of everyone. The wealth gap is ever widening. In the face of an aging population and intergenerational poverty, the government has the primary responsibility of improving the situation. In terms of poverty alleviation, the government should be forward-looking. Instead of adopting welfare measures, the government should act with precision to provide better support to grassroots families so that everyone would have the same upward mobility opportunities. In terms of resource allocation and income security, more should be done to provide a level playing field for all in Hong Kong. We have proposed to the government to set up the post of Commissioner for Poverty Alleviation so that a more targeted approach can be taken. There should be improvements to the minimum wage mechanism. In this budget, the ceiling for CEF, Continuing Education Fund, has been increased. This will help grassroots workers, but at the same time, the government should do more to create more jobs and improve the quality of manpower. In line with future development, resources should be put in so that we put priority to employment and improve employment opportunities for everyone, especially the grassroots. Next, wealth redistribution. Madam Deputy, we should learn from our country. We should alleviate people, we should tackle poverty with precision. There is a need to adjust the wealth reallocation mechanism so that we can share the fruit of economic success and grasp future development opportunities. The FTU is proposing labor movement in a new era. This is on the basis of common wealth for all. And we believe that on top of the two-tier tax regime, there should be the third tier. For those making a profit of over $100 million, the applicable tax rate should be 17.5%. It is estimated, roughly, that the additional tax revenue will stand at $6 billion a year. That over 1,000 mega corporations will need to pay more, but this will be insignificant for them. Meanwhile, poor people will have more support and more development opportunities, and they'll be lifted out of poverty sooner. Third, in terms of public housing shortage and other housing issues, this year's budget proposes a 10-year housing production program. 350 hectares of land have been identified for 330,000 public housing units. Together with 17,000 transitional housing units proposed in last year's budget, there will be more relief measures to expedite the supply of housing in Hong Kong. All these show the government's commitment to addressing people's housing needs, and that the government understands that there is a keen demand for housing. However, the government should show greater resolve and to address the issue. As of December 2021, the average waiting time for public housing is 6 years. Over 226,000 people living in subdivided units. Madam Deputy, I also visited quite a number of SCU tenants. I have first-hand experience of how poor the living condition is. This is inadequate housing, and the government has the responsibility of providing dignified accommodation for them. 3 years of average waiting time for public housing should be the performance pledge for the government. According to last year's survey conducted by us, 1/3 of respondents agreed that the government should keep the average waiting time for public housing at 3 years. This is the indicator. But I want to emphasize that the 3-year waiting time shouldn't just be a slogan. You should translate words into action. There are people living in inadequate housing conditions, and the government should take action and draw up a concrete timetable and allocate resources so that we put SDU as a thing in the past. Well, Madam Deputy, in the budget, the Financial Secretary proposes a tax deduction for rental expenses in his budget. I think this provides relief for rentees. Over the past 10 years, the FTU has always strived for tax deduction for rental of domestic properties, so we welcome the FS proposal. Property prices are always in the stratosphere. People are living in smaller flats. In 2021, the per capita living space is 16 square meters, far below the global standard. In 2030 plus, the per capita living space target is set at 210 to 237 square feet. So what measures does the government have to achieve this goal? Is there a timetable? Meanwhile, the government should draw up housing policies so that housing is something affordable to people of Hong Kong, so that we can have a roof over our heads. Housing is a crucial matter to all. For 10 years in a row, housing in Hong Kong remains the least affordable in the world. Whereas in the mainland, housing is positioned as only for accommodation, not for speculation. It's not a commodity. I think that for subsidized flats, it should be delinked from the private market so that housing can become affordable to all. We have these deep-seated conflicts in the community, Madam Deputy. I hope that the government can roll out more measures to resolve deep-seated conflicts. Thank you. Dr. Tan Yueheng. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Madam Deputy, this year's budget focuses on fighting the epidemic and providing relief to the people. There are measures to help to support SMEs. I think for the general public and the SMEs, they look forward to the measures in the budget. It helps economic recovery, and it also provides long-term planning for economic development. So on the whole, I support the Appropriation Bill 2022. Specifically, I'd like to speak on the financial measures and fiscal policies in the budget. In terms of risk prevention, in face of fluctuation in global financial markets, there are more risks, and as an international financial center, inevitably Hong Kong will be affected. We can't always say that we have a robust banking system in Hong Kong. We don't have capital outflow, so on and so forth. In fact, the financial system is facing external and internal risks. We have outflow of capital, and we have fewer IPO listings. Many financial institutions are facing a number of challenges. And they also face a risk of incurring huge losses. So Hong Kong must be vigilant. There must not be any systemic risks spreading to the financial system. And I have a number of suggestions. First, there must be a healthy financial reserve. The government should be vigilant and save for the rainy days, and also spend within our means. In the budget 2022 and 23, according to the estimate, the government revenue estimated is 715.9, government expenditure 807.3 billion, and 2 years since the start of the epidemic, $600 billion have been spent. The Hong Kong government always says that money is no matter, but I still think that we should spend wisely. There should be sufficient financial capability in our reserve so that we have resilience against any financial crisis and keep our system robust. Next, we should exercise good capital control and prevent capital outflow. This is a kind of a tactic U.S. adopts. We should prevent the risk of mass capital exodus. In terms of commodity trading, there should be better regulation. We should also prevent market manipulation. Third, we should reduce over-reliance. We should also prevent the risk of Chinese and Hong Kong banks being cut off from SWIFT settlement system. And we should also further promote cross-boundary settlement in renminbi. Number 4, we should also devise emergency plans for extreme situations. At the moment, we have effective risk control, and there is no need to take the initiative to change the system. However, we also need to prevent the risks stemming from extreme conditions. The Hong Kong government should work in advance with the People's Bank of China to come up with contingency plans. Number 5, bolstering Hong Kong's status as an international financial center. I think that with the Connect schemes and offshore renminbi business hubs, etc., I think that we can walk the extra mile. In short, I have 4 comments. First, to further expand the Connect schemes with the mainland, including expanding the coverage of Bond Connect and Stock Connects and also IPO regimes, and to lower the cost of the Connect schemes. At the moment, there is a liquidity problem. We cannot support the mass return of China concept stocks. So we must think of ways to retain foreign investors and the capital. And we should also promote southbound investment by Chinese investors. We should be able to meet the needs of mainland investors to make cross-boundary investment. There should be better communication and to allow social security and pension fund investments from the mainland in Hong Kong products. And next point, offshore renminbi business center. According to the government, the measures will be rolled out to increase liquidity of renminbi or circulation of renminbi. We have cross-boundary wealth management Connect scheme. I think this is a good initiative. I hope that the government can come up with a roadmap and a timetable and report to us the progress. The third point, this is the natural advantage of Hong Kong, and Hong Kong can contribute to internationalization of renminbi. And there are so many things we can do. For example, we can expedite the listing of renminbi denominated stocks, and we can implement a pilot and also promote e-renminbi in a payment system, so on and so forth. I hope that the government can act faster and in a more determined fashion. And the third point is international financial center. The government attaches importance to promoting green finance, and the government is going to has rolled out retail green bond program, and the government should make better use of green sustainable financing tools. All these initiatives should be supported. At the same time, I suggest that we take high-level development to build a green finance hub. For example, we should build a green finance standards that align with the rest of the world in the mainland. And we can set up a carbon trading center in Greater Bay Area. And we can also enhance cooperation and allow more municipal, provincial governments to issue green bonds and promote ESG investments. And increase the ratio of ESG investments in the exchange fund. Number 4, we should grasp the development opportunities arising from Belt and Road initiatives in the Greater Bay Area development. These 2 initiatives are the major source of opportunities for Hong Kong, externally speaking. So for private equity, green bonds, etc. These are investment opportunities. We should build a Belt and Road financing platform, and then in Guangzhou, we can play a role in the BNR financing activities, and in the Greater Bay Area, we can work with the Development Bank and also expedite the development of Greater Bay Area. At the same time, enriching the financial system in Hong Kong so that we can bring new forces to Greater Bay Area development. All in all, the budget has won the acclaim of the people. I support the appropriation bill. I so submit.
Mr. Lee Chen-Kang, in this year's budget, the government launched about $109 billion of one-leaf measures. For example, the $10,000 voucher as proposed by the Liberal Party. I visited the community sector. I heard from the public they welcome this budget. I would like to opine on this budget. For example, on how this would benefit the middle class. The government has been criticized of overlooking the middle class, and this year the relief to the middle class is only maintained at last year level. For example, 100% tax relief of with a cap of $20,000, and there's also rental tax deductions. For a double income family, paying a mortgage and paying taxes, supporting their parents and their family, and hiring a foreign domestic helper, not eligible for any social benefits. They don't have much money left at the end of the month. And during the 5th wave, the burden on them and actually deteriorated. The RAT costs money, and for they need to buy a portable mobile device to have children to get online classes. I hope that the financial secretary should not overlook the support to the middle class. Well, striking a balance, since the middle class make immense contribution to our economy, they hope to get some targeted subsidy to meet some of their daily expenses. And for the $10,000 e-consumption voucher, I'd like to thank the Financial Secretary for adopting our suggestions. Since last year, we have been proposing to launch the e-voucher scheme. Not only it can encourage the people to go for more electronic payment, this can also stimulate the local economy. And last year, you mentioned that the consumption voucher helped to lift the spending atmosphere and also help merchants to launch relevant offers. And therefore, the benefit of the economy is more than the 0.1% as projected. We can see the launch of the consumption voucher. A lot of people are willing to spend more, and the F&B industry and the retail industry can benefit as well. And thirdly, I'd like to talk about the work transport subsidy scheme. I'd like to thank them for adopting our suggestion by relaxing the criteria by 1/3, and the $400 threshold reduced to $200. I see that this subsidy is an excellent policy. Not only we can reduce the transport expenditure, and also encourage the public to take more public transport. Furthermore, we need the people flowing in the community to keep the economy running. And for example, On December 19th of last year, the government launched a free fare day on multiple transport mode, and a lot of people went out as a result. A lot of people told me that was the first time that they took the public transport from Taiwan to Chongqing. The government should consider launching a fare-free day every 6 months, which will stimulate spending. President, I would like to talk about the 54 billion to support hospital authority and procurement of anti-epidemic supplies. I welcome the government's decision at the time of the announcement that was at the peak of the fifth wave. Back then, the daily caseload was in the tens of thousands. The financial secretary stated that the fighting the epidemic was a top priority. Therefore, I see the spending as justified. In our journey in fighting the epidemic, the mainland's supplies has never ceased. The government needs a better job on distributing them. For example, for the phased reopening at schools, requiring the student and the staff to complete RETs before they get to school. Well, from the central authority supplies and the government supplies, it can capable of dispensing free RET kits. The departments did not distribute free kits, which was disappointment. We should not add to the financial stress to parents. Next, I would like to talk about the pro-IT measures in the budget. The 14th Review Plan talked about focusing on human health as well as utilizing live tech. The COVID has raised the awareness on live tech research. I welcome the government reserving $10 billion to promote Hong Kong live science development. It also supports turning Hong Kong into an IT innovation hub. According to the FS, IT development not only facilitates economic growth and create jobs, it also helps to digitize medical industry and reindustrialization while lifting the manufacturing industry competitiveness. Our universities has excellent teachers and students with internationalized atmosphere and strong expertise. In the past, it had lacked coordination and R&D expenditure. We're not able to generate better results for the R&D. Therefore, I suggested to launching a subsidy scheme for university subsidy programs by doubling it to $16 million. The government should step up coordination, which will help the institutions to commoditize their research as well as internationalize their commercialization results. We are now in the Industry 4.0 era. Industrial development help the R&D results get to the community, and with the mainland as our backup, the 1.4 billion is a huge market for us. Hong Kong should proactively expedite the construction or seize the opportunity from the dual circulation trend so that our industrial products and R&D can be moved to a higher level. And finally, I would like to talk about the GBA development. The FS proposed that it was allocated 153 million for the mainland support scheme. I would like to thank the government to adopt our suggestion so that the Chamber of Commerce and the Youth Entrepreneur Associations in the mainland can apply funding to conduct exchanges, visit trips, and promotions. They can leave Hong Kong and enter into the mainland. And all these measures, the department in charge can streamline the procedures and reduce the eligibility criteria so that the associations can obtain the funding more easily. The fifth wave has eased considerably. The government had gradually eased the social distancing measures with our life finally go back on track. Some experts mentioned that there might be a 6th or 7th wave coming. The government should prepare for the rainy days by earmarking some of the funding and resources so that when the next threat arrives, that we still have sufficient anti-epidemic supplies and deliver to those in need instead of having to apply additional funding from Let's Go. 2 years into the pandemic, Hong Kong and the mainland and the overseas are yet to resume quarantine-free travel. There is a huge bottleneck. The government should have a detailed plan to play catch-up. Especially during transition with the new term government, it should consider how to redevelop our economy, especially on the GBA and the National 14th Year Plan context. We need to seize our advantages under one country system. President, I so submit to support Appropriation Bill 2022. Thank you.
主席，今日
President, this is the last budget of this current term government. Well, we always had the financial secretary must be forward-thinking while keeping in view of the mainland and the world. The 14th Year Plan expected Hong Kong to play a substantive role and invite Hong Kong to be on the fast-track train to development. We must seize the opportunity without delay. Back in my college days, my favorite scholar was Charles Lindblom. He advocated incrementalism. For every result, we need to see how it gets to the eventual goal step by step. In every budget, I believe is catered to the prevailing circumstances, and each budget must also pave the way ahead. And we need to build the futures with many generations. The past financial secretary were forced to cope with major challenges, and Donald Tsang back in 1997 was the Asian economic crisis, and John Tsang were faced with the financial tsunami. And this term, FS Paul Chen, need to cope with the pressure from internal externally in 2019 Black Cloud riots, as well as the precarious global situation and the COVID-19 pandemic, which led to a global recession. With overriding an economic need, and I do not dispute that there should be cash handouts. However, we must uphold the principle that we must not damage our fundamentals. We need to maintain our fiscal reserve and our competitiveness. This term FS and the next term FS, the biggest challenge for them is to how to spend and how to make money. That with huge livelihood expenditure on medical, healthcare, and elderly, and healthcare and health and major infrastructure, how do we balance our books? In the past 2 years, the 6 rounds of anti-epidemic funds cost us $190 billion. The Lantau tomorrow will cost $640 billion. The Northern Metropolis will yet to come up with an accurate estimate. However, from the Future Fund, it obtained $100 billion. By 2030, we're an aging society. 30% of them are age 60, and there's a huge welfare and healthcare burden. This term FS has tried his best. Back in 2017 and 18, it managed to achieve a $138 billion surplus. And due to the pandemic, for the past 2 years, we have a $250 billion in surplus. And last year, he projected a deficit of $101 billion. At the end, it turned in a surplus of $18.9 billion. Well, it's due to the land sale, for example, of the central waterfront site, which boosts our land revenue. However, can they be able? Do we have this quality land every year? And now that we have about $946.7 billion in reserves, The basic law stipulated that the government should maintain its books. Section Article 8, which shall maintain its low tax policy, and therefore we cannot boost revenue by raising taxes. Most importantly, we need to maintain our status as the international financial center. Financial security is under threat, and our financial talent and the fintech talent, how can we train them? How can we attract more? And how can we make them stay and settle? It's something we need to work on. Well, if we are spending on long-term investment, that it will definitely be worthwhile, especially investment on talent and technology. And further, on livelihood, Hong Kong must demonstrate the edge of capitalism under one country, two system. Not only we need to maintain a capitalist system, well, this is a matter of national policy. At the same time, we able to make money easier, able to attract the new economies along the Belt and Road to make money here and attracting their talent as well. Our capitalist system cannot impact the people's livelihood. There should not be an explosion in subdivided units. Therefore, in terms of competitiveness and livelihood expenditure, they are not mutually exclusive. They need to be complementary. How do we make money? Well, I support the cash handouts in the financial budget considering this year's special circumstances. After the pandemic, we need to rebuild in four aspects. For economic reconstruction. Second, digital reconstruction. Thirdly, technology construction. And fourth, rebuild our healthcare system. In the budget have allocated $43 million for the financial talent of tech. And second, of a digitized economy committee. Well, we must go on the path of digitization. After the pandemic, in terms of we changed the consumption of lifestyle, online shopping, and video conferencing, and so on. And yet, Hong Kong has lagging behind in terms of digital payment and so on. If we rely on cash handout to support traditional industries, we wouldn't last long. Besides handouts, we must help the SMEs to go digital, or even at the wet market that everyone can adapt to a new payment system. In terms of digitization, the government should digitize itself. I know a lot of software was always the conventional ones, and Mr. John Lee was for the YouTube closure incident, even though he didn't care. However, this is a reminder for us that shouldn't government to invest in research for our own software. At least we should take a parallel approach. From software or policy or in our elections, well, we just can't lose the voters' particulars. This was very worrying. Our technology bottleneck is the lack of land. If you notice, well, Miss Chow Hoi Shun, the famous entrepreneur, a multi-story building can manufacture 1/3 of the milk supply in the world. We need to change. We shouldn't stop obsessing about land. In terms of making money, well, the Northern Metropolis and the land Tautomore and the Yao Chin Wang redevelopment needs money. We need to issue more bonds so that we can form a tripartite partnership so that we have a shared achievement. And for the silver hair economy, well, for the baby boomers, are workaholics. Well, they can help to mentor the younger talent. Well, they can tap into their Rolodex and actually push them become tutors of underprivileged children. We can learn from Singapore as well. We can achieve win-win with Singapore. Well, we should learn from the Temasek Fund. The government make the investment for the startup industries, entrepreneurs, the talent. Or if we identify any unicorns, we can make direct investment. Well, if 3 out of 50 investment paid off, there will be a bonanza for Hong Kong. This means a lot of jobs. We can have a very elastic tax regime that can attract companies to set up headquarters in Hong Kong. Hong Kong has all the right conditions. Well, the financial secretary helped to steer it through crisis. I would like to thank Mr. Paul Charles for his work for the past 5 years. Thank you.
Mr. Yu Peng Lang, thank you, President. In the 2022-23 budget, the Financial Secretary proposed various relief measures and also support measures for businesses and economic development. It's also set aside $6 billion for supporting the tourism industry. For example, the local tourist incentive scheme for the tourism sector to develop local tours, and then also funds for talent training for the tourism sector, and so on. That shows that government takes the tourism sector very seriously, and I commend the government for its effort. Now, in the budget, the Financial Secretary has taken on board the views of myself and my sector. So it shows that the Financial Secretary cares about the sector and he's listening to our views, and also he takes future planning very seriously. Since the start of the 5th wave of the epidemic, the government announced the suspension of local tour and local cruise tours, and also the flight bans imposed. So the struggling tourism sector again faced another 3 months of closure of business. And then starting from last week, government launched the first phase of relaxation of social distancing measures. Local tours could be resumed. But then local tours are just warm up for the sector. We're just trying to give some work to employees, but they don't really help much. It's still a long way for a full recovery of the tourism sector. Tourism is pillar industry in Hong Kong. Is the hardest hit by the pandemic. The government has to provide continuous and precise support for the sector. Now we want the sector to be revived. It will take many more measures. The past 2 years, the tourism sector has come to a standstill. Those in industry are exhausting all their reserve, and we still face a lot of problems. For example, they have scaled down their office to just one desk. How are they going to expand their offices again when business resume? And how can they update the equipment, office equipment they've not used for 2 years? And how do they recover their coach fleet, which been left idle for 2 years? So we need funds for the tourism sector to restart. And it's also, we need to help them to upgrade the technology and be prepared for resumption of business. And also, airlines and hotels also face serious wastage of staff. Many practice in the industry have actually switched to other trades because of the uncertainties. And so even if business is to reopen, it will be difficult to hire enough experienced and suitable staff. So the government needs to provide more training for the sector. There should be vocational training courses for the sector. And the government also has to launch on-the-job training and other internship schemes. This is to encourage young people to join the industry. And then the employment support scheme started receiving application last Friday. It only covered 3 months, and so it's just, again, a one-off short-term measure. The scheme will only cover up to July, but it's not possible for the tourism sector to resume business by July. So there's need to give continuous support to the tourism sector. It should help businesses with their wage burden so they could stay afloat. For example, Singapore has a JSS scheme, a job subsidy scheme that lasts some 2 years. The government will keep reviewing the impact, the extent of the impact on different trades, and they will provide suitable subsidy. For example, the subsidy could be increased from 50% to 70%, and they will have regard to the situation in Singapore, and then they will make constant adjustment within a certain range in a flexible manner. That will help resources to go to sectors that need the help most. Now, it's important for the government to give support to the tourism sector, but to the sector, most importantly, is that they could resume business. Now, the government has responded to our demands and have relaxed them, has again allowed local tours, the opening of theme parks and so on in the first phase of the relaxation of social distancing measures. Now, we need to maintain Hong Kong's status as a cruising center, so the government needs to get in touch with cruise liners so they could come back to Hong Kong again. There is need to relaunch the cruising sector. Of course, for us, the most important thing is resumption of quarantine-free travel and resumption of flight services. Now, Hong Kong is the gateway, the southern gateway of the country. We're open to the public. We have comprehensive land, sea, and water transport network. So, but then we've been hit by the pandemic for 2 years. Hong Kong has almost severed all connections with the mainland and other parts of the country, or there are almost no travelers to Hong Kong. With very stringent quarantine requirements, many in the business sector are worried whether we could maintain our business-friendly environment. On the 1st of May, the government has taken an important step to resume flight services. Now, we've been fighting hard for relaxation of the circuit breaker mechanism, and the government's doing that. It's taken on board my suggestion to include calculation on the basis of ratio or percentage of the passengers on board. And also the government has removed the restriction on non-Hong Kong residents coming to Hong Kong, so that's a first step it's taking. Many experts have pointed out that in Hong Kong we have built an adequate immunity barrier, and there's also a substantial boost in vaccination rate, so the Hong Kong could go a few steps further in relaxing the relevant quarantine arrangement and remove the circuit breaker mechanism. And also, it should allow people to transit northwards. Then Hong Kong could keep its status as an international aviation hub. Now, in the 14th five-year plan, it's mentioned that Hong Kong should play the role of many hubs and centers. We should also seize upon the opportunities of dual circulation. Most importantly, we have to, again, resume our ties with the mainland and other parts of the world. Now, of course, we must support the anti-epidemic strategy of the mainland. We can't just lie flat, but at the same time, we can't keep half closed on a long-term basis. And then we don't do anything about resuming travel. Then Hong Kong will lose its status as the many centers, and it will lose talents too, and then Hong Kong will no longer feature prominently in the international aviation world, and Hong Kong will suffer seriously. Now, as the pandemic is coming under control, we ask the government to come up with a strategy for resumption of travel with the mainland and other parts of the world. It has to be scientific, that we should pay a reasonable price for anti-epidemic measures, and then there has to be a roadmap for resumption of travel with the mainland and other parts of the world. And then Hong Kong could then be linked up again with the country and other parts of the world, and then Hong Kong will again be sent an Asian hospitality capital. Thank you. Dr. Junius Ho. Now, we're debating the 2022 to 23 budget. This is although the sixth budget of Mr. Paul Chan. In the past 5 years, I've given his budget my full support. And what is my position this year? There is a record high spending in the budget this year, $870.7 billion. But at the same time, we also have a record high revenue, $715.9 billion. So our deficit would be some $56.3 billion, 1.9% of our GDP. Last year, we're supposed to have a deficit $101.6 billion, but with the good fortune of the financial secretary, instead of a deficit, we have a surplus of $18.9 billion. And then our reserve has also reached $946 billion. So we are really fortunate. Instead of deficit, now we have a surplus. For this year, the deficit compared to last year, is it serious? If you look at $56.3 billion compared to $101.6 billion, the deficit is only half. The projected deficit is only half of that of last year. So I still have confidence in the financial secretary. So I will still support your sixth budget. What does the basic law say? Article 107 of the basic law says that the Hong Kong SAR government should follow the principle of keeping expenditure within the limits of revenues. It should strive to achieve a fiscal balance, avoid deficits, and keep the budget commensurate with the growth rate of its GDP. And then Article 108 says that the Hong Kong SAR shall practice an independent taxation system. The Hong Kong SAR shall, taking the low tax policy previously pursued in Hong Kong as reference, enact laws on its own types of taxes, tax rates, tax reductions, and so on. So what do we have to do now? We have to keep expenditure within the limits of revenues. We have a very narrow tax base. We've been talking about that for years in this council. And in past governments also considered GST, goods and services tax. Well, if we rely on a low tax regime, well, that's not a problem. But if we have a very narrow tax base, then our hands will be tied. And so far, no one's mentioned that today. Now, according to your booklet, profits tax revenues $167.7 billion, land sales revenue $150 billion, stamp duty revenue. We're supposed to curb property prices, but then now we have stamp duty revenue $113 billion and salaries tax revenue $70+ billion. So we just have three major sources of tax revenue. So should we consider expanding the tax base? If we consider GST, 1% is about $6 billion. And let's say we adopt an international starting point of about 5%, that means a revenue of $30 billion. It's not a small sum to be, it could still keep you very warm, like a warm jacket. So if we want to generate new revenue sources, we have to consider it. It's a matter of courage if you do it or not. And then paragraphs 120 and 123 to 123, Northern Metropolis and Lantau Tomorrow. Well, I actually have great reservation about Lantau Tomorrow because it involves reclamation, and it's only in 2027 we will start reclamation, and it won't be till 2034 before we have the first batch of population intact. That means 2 terms of government later. And then our new chief executive, Mr. John Lee, well, he'll be the new chief executive from the 1st of July. He say he is results oriented. If we look at the progress of Lantau Tomorrow, then the results are a long way away. It will only be 2034 before people move in. That is over 10 years later. So you have to really rethink that. Well, instead, why don't we focus on speeding up the Northern Metropolis development strategy? Because we just need to pay to resume land, and then we could start building. So it's all a matter of planning. Yesterday, there was the meeting of the development panel at Nim Wan Road. In Nim Wan, they are going to build a road of 7.1 kilometers long, but it will take 7 years to complete the project. Really, if we still go by the civil service system, people just do the minimum work, then of course something that we need to consider. So if we talk about creating new revenue sources, Lantau Tomorrow is not as effective as Northern Metropolis. So the most practical thing is to proceed with the Northern Metropolis development. And what other revenue sources do we have? It has to do with making savings too. There are 3 areas that take up 55% of our spending. Healthcare, $162.8 billion because of the special expenditure. But even without that, the spending is over $100 billion, especially because we have an aging population, but then people living longer, but then we don't have enough money. Then, of course, that means huge spending. Welfare spending, $120 billion. Education, $119 billion. So the 3 add up to $394.7 billion. And then our revenue is $700+ billion. So these 3 items account for 55.13% of our spending. Or if we have more revenue at the level of $807 billion, then it's 38%. So we only have revenue of some $700 billion, but we're spending some $390 billion on these 3 items. So, well, we leave it to the public sector to take care of people's health is actually a huge burden. Of course, there is a tax incentive for people to buy private medical insurance. But then, the best way is for us to use the MPF save money. So we allow people of a certain age to buy medical insurance from their MPF contribution. That will be actually more appealing to people. And then people will be encouraged to take out private medical insurance, and that would actually lessen the burden on the public healthcare system. On making savings, well, another thing about generating revenue, tourism, is one thing, and which is hiking. Hiking is a great attraction to foreign travelers as well as local residents. But now you're only spending $2 billion on country parks. 2 days ago, I went hiking, and I really struggled. But the facilities there were good. But then they are also in disrepair. So the government's not doing a good job maintaining such facilities. Now, since we have money, we should enhance all our country parks to become a new attraction to overseas travelers. And then we can turn Hong Kong into a beautiful garden city. Finally, civil servants, they should be like me. What do they need to do? They need to trim themselves. That I think I've become overweight. You know, I weigh 200 pounds. I have to hike up this mountain is really just a struggle for me. So it's the same for the civil service. Huge spending will bring us down. Thank you.
Ms. Carmen Can. Mr. President, I speak to support the Appropriation Bill 2022. We are now in an unprecedented new situation over the 100 years. Last year, the government recorded over $29 billion of surplus. According to this year's budget, the Finance Secretary continues to adopt an expansionary fiscal policy to make an all-out effort to win the fight against the epidemic, relieve the hardship of our people and SMEs, render support to the struggling economy, and foster post-epidemic economic revival. These are the four major directions. Together with $43 billion allocated to the employment support scheme, I would say that these are all good measures. At the time of the delivery of the budget, the unemployment rate was 3.9%. Now is 5%, and the total underemployment rates also rose to over 3%. So in the near future, we would need to bear the brunt. Hong Kong now sits on a reserve of $590 billion. We have sufficient money to tide us over emergencies and the epidemic. However, we need to make sure we have sufficient reserves for future challenges. According to the government, public expenditure will continue to be on the rise, and the rising aging population and the low birth rate will pose a great challenge to our fiscal position. We need to make bold economic development, and I am all for the FS's philosophy of putting people first, especially that we need to be mindful. The purpose of economic development, of course, is for the people. The outlined development plan for the Greater Bay Area has been published for 3 years. We need to cherish the advantages given under the one country, two systems principle, and we need to make sure we have accurate positioning of Hong Kong in the Greater Bay Area. $5 billion will be allocated to the GBA Investment Fund to grasp investment opportunities. This is a good start, but as a next step, there should be more transparency in terms of management of the $5 billion. There should be annual injection, there should be quicker and more frequent injections. And I look forward to the government giving an account to the Legislative Council on the use of the fund. There will be government reorganization very soon, and I emphasize always that there should be better coordination to take forward the country's strategic development direction, including the positioning of Hong Kong in the 14th five-year plan. The Commissioner of the GBA Development is now under the Development Bureau. It is difficult to mobilize other bureaus to get better coordination. I urge that this Commissioner takes a better coordinator role so that we can have proper alignment with the authorities in the Greater Bay Area. We should attach importance to to our integration with the Greater Bay Area and our positioning in the 14th five-year plan. These should form the backbone of our fiscal policy, and we should also adopt this mindset in providing a dedicated chapter in our budget. Next, I'd like to talk about digital economy. The Hong Kong Monetary Authority launched a consultation on digital Hong Kong dollar. The purpose is to bring vibrancy to the digital economy concept And in order to have digital economy, we need to have digital government. President Xi Jinping last week held a committee on deepening reform and also provided opinion on developing a digital government, and that this should be widely applied to government services, and that we should make better use of government cloud and to provide the better support to modernize government services. In other words, we should take a look at how big data are used in fighting the epidemic in the mainland. They have different QR code systems for commuters, etc., so that they can gauge the epidemic situation accurately and impose targeted epidemic control measures. In the Financial Secretary's budget, it is mentioned that a steering committee we set up to promote the development of a digital economy. We look forward to this committee. In the coming 3 years, $600 million will be spent on e-government audit. And at the Special Finance Committee meeting, I asked for the details of e-government audit. I understand that the government's mindset is very rigid, and that with citizens' consent, we can have shared use of data among government departments. We have 1.2 million users of I.M. Smart. Why don't we use I.M. Smart for registering the any payouts, a cash payout scheme? I'm sure that the number of users will increase substantially. The government should make use of this opportunity of e-government audit to reflect on its inadequacies. Reference should be made to the 14th five-year plan on the promotion of digitizing the government. It was published in October last year. And in the UK, there is a Digital Economy Act, and in Singapore, there is also an act relating to regulating government services. We must act now and look into legislating on digitization. Many members have spoken in support of that, and the Legislative Council will definitely provide support to the government and provide legal backing for building a good digital government. I suggest that digital government be one core element of digitization. Mr. President, 2022 marks the 25th year of Hong Kong's reunification with the motherland, and it's also a new era. We are improving the electoral system. It's an exercise to abide by the fundamental principle of patriots administering Hong Kong. It ensures the long-term prosperity and stability of Hong Kong under one country, two systems. We have good interactions between the executive and the legislature, and we should make this. The government should take this good opportunity to improve governance. The 7th term of Legislative Council has brought the start of a new era. I look forward to the new term of government bringing in a new era as well. I hope that the new government will focus on improving people's livelihood and make good use of the funding available to tackle deep-seated and long-standing livelihood problems, so as to resolve long-standing problems and to think out of the box and work hard for the future. And I thank the FS and the public officers for listening to my speech. The council is now adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning.